Well, happy Monday, everybody. So thankful you've joined me again. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving, great weekend. Today, for our Bible reading plan and our devotion, we are in the 15th chapter of Mark. And as I read this chapter, what I reflected on and wrote in my journal about and prayed about was living for Jesus in the midst of hostility. Living for Jesus in the midst of a culture or a world that doesn't get him, doesn't always accept him for who he really is. And I want you to notice in this chapter, Jesus had been on trial and he's being crucified, how he's treated, how he's insulted. In verse 3, they were harshly making accusations against him. In verse 10, Pilate recognized they had arrested Jesus and turned him over to him for crucifixion out of envy and jealousy. In verse 13, the crowd wanted they wanted to crucify him. In verses 17 and following, these soldiers made fun of Jesus because Roman soldiers, for the most part, hated having to do duty, serve in Palestine. And anytime they had an opportunity to make sport of, have fun with, abuse a Jew, that was a delight to them. And so they dressed Jesus up in verse 17 in a purple robe or cloth or something, purple, the color of royalty, put a crown of thorns on his head like a king would wear a crown. And they mockingly say, "Hail, King of the Jews." They're making fun of him. And they would beat him with a stick or a rod, a reed, and they would spit on him and pretend to kneel before him, just all in mockery, all of it in mockery. In fact, verse 20 says they mocked him. And dropping down to verses 31 and following, when Jesus is hanging on the cross, the chief priest and the scribes were mocking Jesus. And at the end of verse 32, the thieves crucified with Jesus were insulting him. And so Jesus was treated with great disrespect, with disdain, with malice, with insults. And then you have Joseph of Arimathea. And what a contrast. In the midst of all that, in verse 43, Joseph of Arimathea came. He's a prominent member of the Jewish council, the Sanhedrin that had sentenced Jesus to death, who himself was waiting for the kingdom of God. He was a man of faith. And I love this. He gathered up courage. He gathered up courage and went in before Pilate and asked for the body. And then, of course, he's the one that buries Jesus. But what grabbed my heart was in the midst of all of this hostility and hatred toward Jesus, this disdain and disrespect for Jesus, these insults and ridicule directed at Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea, in the midst of all that, found the courage to express compassion for Jesus, asked for his body, and bury him. And the truth is, in our culture and world, when there is disdain and hostility for Jesus and his teaching and in who he is, when people laugh or mock, people of faith, people who've really been saved, act like Joseph of Arimathea. And through our faith, find the courage to love Jesus while the insults are being hurled. The other thing, when they were abusing and insulting and disrespecting Jesus, when they were killing Jesus, he was actually making salvation available for us and for them. And so when everything looks hostile, keep the faith, because Jesus is up to some things in that moment you don't know about. Keep the faith, no matter how angry the world is. Be a Joseph of Arimathea in the midst of a culture that disrespects Jesus, and you'll be okay. That's the word for today. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow.